Welcome to the Wisdom Lifestyle Money Show. I'm your host, Scott Dillingham. The show is designed to help Canadians invest better in Canada and the United States. We are the North America-based mortgage financing lender and provide education to both countries. Discover how you can become a better investor and access the financing you need. Welcome back to the Wisdom Lifestyle Money Show. I'm your host, Scott Dillingham. I'm really excited today. I've known Shawn Quigg for a long time. He's a real estate investing focused lawyer. He's part of the Cardinal Law firm, doing tons of great stuff with investors. And I actually reached out to you, Shawn. I know we've known each other for some time, but I saw some of your videos that you're posting. And I'm like, you know what? I actually love that he's posting this content. It's so useful. And most lawyers, they wouldn't present, this information online. And I'm like, this is so great. I want to chat. So here we are. So welcome.
Scott, thanks so much for having me. It's good to chat with you again and share that conversation.
Yeah. So let's start with your story. I always like to start when I have someone on for the first time with their story. So, growing up and how you got into the real estate investing world, and then obviously law, and kind of some tips that the listener will be able to take away today.
Well, I got started in investing in real estate almost by accident. I had a career with the federal government. I was in immigration enforcement. And so I was working in Toronto, fighting the good fight. And I lost a case. And when, in that role, we had a right to what's called a judicial review. And so I ended up working with the lawyers at the Department of Justice on the appeal. And I was doing a lot of their work because I knew the case inside and out, and they had to represent the government at federal court. And so this is when the bug of, hey, maybe I should do that, sort of hit me. So I applied to law school. I got in, but before I got in, I had 3 applications out, and a buddy of mine said, "Well, if you get into the University of Windsor, you should just buy a house because they're so cheap." And so this was back in 2014, 2015. And so as you probably remember, they were very inexpensive at that time.
Yeah.
And so I got into Windsor and I was like, well, I guess I'm going to buy a house then. So I bought a house. It was 5 bedrooms. And I thought, well, why don't I rent the other rooms out to other law students? I was coming from a job with a salary and a pension, and, I was going to nothing. So I thought, well, I got to find a way to at least live for free. So that's what I did. So I rented the rooms to other students, and before long, within a couple of months, I was cash flowing, which is really great because one of the most important ingredients to getting through law school is beer money.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what it gave me, a little bit of beer money. And so, I love school so much, I decided I'd add a business degree to my law degree. And, we're learning about the essence of a corporation one day in finance. And I learned something so antithetical to everything I'd ever been taught, that cash is the least valuable asset of a corporation because it loses its value every day to inflation. And this was mind blowing to me. I've been taught to save. Not that I took that lesson, but I'd been taught to save. And, I had access to all of this sort of cash. It wasn't mine, it was the bank's. But I had access to it because I was in law school. So I thought, well, why don't I use that and buy another student rental? And I'll learn, I'll take the lessons I've learned, which are buy closer to the school, buy a bigger house. That's what I did. So, for some numbers, my first house I got for $133,000.
Crazy.
The second one I got for $236,000. It had 5 bedrooms and 2 living rooms. The second living room became a bedroom within a month. So I also had it full, like 5 bedrooms. 4 of the 5 bedrooms were rented before I even took possession. The seller was a real estate agent in Windsor that you would probably know, and he allowed me to show the house before I owned it. So there I was. I had two cash flowing assets while in my second year of a 4-year sort of joint program, and it sort of just blossomed from there. I'd never heard of the BRRRR strategy. Here I was thinking I was pretty smart, right? Have it with all the cash flows. So I thought, well, let's get into student rentals. But I sort of missed the boat by the time I really came around to it. You remember that period of time, 2012 to 2016 in Windsor was prime time for student rentals, right? And if you knew how to do it really well, which a few of the people did, you were you were cash flowing very well.
Yep.
Anyway,
That's when
so
I started.
um,
That's when I
you
started
know,
lending. And just
yeah,
for the
right.
listeners
So you know
here, I
exactly.
remember we did a training at the bank and you kind of confirmed it, but they said the average sales price in Windsor, right? So this is owner occupied everything, was 189,000. That was the average. It's crazy.
What's it now?
Oh, way
450.
higher. It's yeah. I think it's like
Yeah, yeah.
600 to 650 is the average sales price now.
So as I'm getting into the real estate investing space, I start joining the Facebook programs, or sorry, the Facebook groups, and I start to see that no one's all that happy with their lawyer. So most people are working with your average residential real estate lawyer, and there's a time and a place for that expertise. But as you get into investing and buying small multifamily and getting into private financing, buying wholesale deals, um, the private mortgage is probably the biggest piece. The average residential real estate lawyer does not do that work and isn't necessarily proficient in it. And so I had this idea. Why not pair my interest in investing in real estate with my profession? So it took a little while, right? I started on Bay Street. I was doing the big law, corporate commercial work for a bit. And then I eventually said, you know what? I'm gonna take this on. So I went to a smaller firm. I was there for 2.5 years. Really sort of cut my teeth in the industry. Learned a ton about how to be an investor for real estate investors. Sorry, how to be a lawyer for real estate investors, and then launched my own firm about a year and a half ago, and then had the opportunity to merge it with this one with Cardinal Law. And so now my partner Milena and I have this sort of super firm for real estate investors by real estate investors. I'm still an investor. My partner Milena is as
Oh,
well.
that's incredible. And I've actually had Milena on the podcast previously. So for anyone who may have heard that, yeah, that's ties it all together. That's incredible. So what do you find? Because I know, again, the video that struck me as inspiring was um, it was you had a deal, it was difficult to close it. I'm sure there's things that you can't talk about here as to why it was difficult to close it, but you came up with some solutions, and I love that. And what do you find the biggest challenges in real estate for an investor are? Because I agree with you, most people they don't understand it, and if you go to the wrong lawyer, yeah, I've seen a lot of issues. So what would you say would be those issues, and how do we get past them?
Right now, we're recording in late 2025, and the biggest issue that is facing investors right now is that they borrowed all sorts of money cheap a couple of years ago, and that money is time. It's time to collect on that if you're the lender, and equity is down, values are down, and so the refinance ability is just not there. Right? You remember the boom when you could be the worst investor in the world and still be making a ton of dough because the values were just going up 12% a month. That's no longer the case. As you and I both know, values are going down or have stagnated. And as a result, everyone's having trouble paying out their lenders. So I am seeing a ton of power of sale. And a power sale on a house is bad enough. But I'm seeing a lot of power sale on big projects, on development projects, on large multifamily. And that's where things get really sticky. So the transaction you're talking about, the post that I made, was about a power of sale proceeding where our client was the owner and borrower and ran out of money to pay the interest, and his joint venture partners. Well, he didn't actually finish with the joint venture agreement. Started on it, never got it signed, never got it finalized, and as a result, we had no leverage to go sue his partners to keep chipping in more money. And as a result, he stopped. He was out of cash, stopped paying the mortgage. So the lender started the power of sale proceeding. So our job was to do two things really: hold off the power of sale as long as we could until he could sell the building, which he did. He was able to sell the building, but inexplicably, he delayed the closing by 3 months. And over those 3 months, the amount owing to the lender became so much that it exceeded the purchase price, which added a third problem or a third thing to solve, which was getting the lender to accept less in exchange for not only a discharge of the mortgage, but also a release of the guarantor, basically a full and final settlement. That was the key piece. That was the hard part here because paying out the lender is one thing. And yeah, sure, they'll take a $50,000, $60,000 haircut now, but they're just going to turn around and personally sue the proponent personally, which sort of defeats the purpose. So we were able to limit his exposure to about $12,000 from 1.8 million, which I count as a win. I don't think 12,000 is enough for anyone to
Yeah.
really go after, and it would be small claims in any event. So we got a win. It was a challenge. There were, there was a very difficult lender. The lender themselves, they were fine. Their lawyer is a well-known private lending lawyer in the industry, and notorious, you might say. And the seller also, his lawyer, I think, was sort of playing in a league that maybe he ought not to have been in. So that created some challenges as well. But in the end, everyone got what they
Okay.
wanted.
So that's an awesome story. Um, Now for the investors, right? And hearing what you're saying and reading between the lines, I think, right, especially if you have those expensive money loans, right, and it's coming due, lots of renewals are coming due, right, and they are worried about power of sales from that, from the loans being unaffordable. I think to reduce that, and I'm sure you'd agree, is speak to a lender now. Even though your loan might not be up for 6 months to a year, um, and your rate's going up, speak to someone now, get a game plan going. Um, Now your client, it was an unfortunate situation that they couldn't pay it. It was slightly different, right? Deal, but still, those with existing properties, right? If they don't get in and chat with their lender, it could cause trouble. So, would you agree? Like, get in early and come up with a game plan before it's too late.
Yeah, no doubt. Getting ahead of it is going to work out so much better. Now, there's a fine line here. You don't want to go so far as to say you're going to default. That's going to result in possibly a legal issue called anticipatory breach. And anticipatory breach is problematic because it basically accelerates the deal. It basically says, well, you are telling me that you can't complete our transaction now, even though it's not due for 4 months. Well, then I'm declaring it default now. And that is permitted. So you want to work with them on a without prejudice basis. You definitely want to talk to your mortgage broker. You probably want to talk to your lawyer. And if you have joint venture partners, they need to be on board. One of the things that sort of shocks me, and it happens so often, are joint venture or shareholder agreements that show up unsigned. If you're out there and you have partners and you don't have an agreement, or you have an agreement but it's not signed, that should be priority number one today. Get it signed, because without it, you got no
Yep.
leverage.
And with multifamily too, like there's ways around it. We saved a deal, not quite to the extent of yours, but we had a client that they bought the property with not good financing because they're trying to turn it over, and they did turn it over, but not to their full capacity. They're younger investors and they just didn't know all the ins and outs and everything. So ultimately, they got done the project and they wanted to refinance it, but it didn't have the appraisal value they were looking for because they didn't increase the rents and do just the things that were fully needed to get better terms. So kind of like you, the project was becoming unaffordable. So we kind of coached them on some solutions to get those rents up, which for those that are listening and that don't know this, right? With commercial, the higher the rents, the higher your property's value. So we were able to force the value up by turning it over properly. And then we could do the refinance, get them out, get them into better terms, making it affordable now. And now they have positive cash flow. So little things like that people don't realize. People are busy too. Like I see so many investors that forget to raise the rents, and that could even be a solution here, right? You could have your mortgage renewals coming up where the payment is going to be high that you don't cash flow, but maybe you've been too busy that you haven't actually raised your rents. In Ontario, right, with rent control, there's limits, but other provinces there's not, right? So these are things that you should look at to maximize, the success of your project and deal. So
Yeah, it's amazing what having the right people on your team can
Yeah.
do for you, right? Um, completing a project, takeout financing should be where you
Yes.
start and then work backwards to
Yes.
purchase, right? Um, because the purchase is really just the start, right? The value add piece is the hard part, but the hardest part is that takeout financing. And if you don't have everything lined up, more or less perfectly, your takeout finance is going to be impacted, which could mean your perfect burr turns into a not so perfect burr. Maybe you're leaving six figures buried, and that could have been avoided if you just figured it out
That's
in
right.
advance.
And working with the key people is super important. Like we're doing this deal, large developer, he bought the property and he developed it all on his own. And then he met me and he's like, I want to do the MLI Select program. Right. Well, actually, to be honest, he didn't really know about it, but I told him about it and then he wanted to do it. So the thing is, with MLI Select, as you know, you need to reach 100 points if you want max leverage, right? With the longest amortizations. So we came up shy on the energy audit. It was going to be a 45-year amortization. But then we sat down with him and we went through the plans and everything, and his renderings showed what they were adding to this existing property. It used to be a school. They converted it to residential. But they built on top of existing insulation. So with that, we were able to get the points needed. So we had the full drawing. So just back to your point about meeting with the right team first before you start a project, because had we not noticed that, right, he wouldn't have had the full points and he would have had to potentially lower loan to values and, like I said, shorter amortizations eating into his cash flow. So in this guy's case, it worked great. We made it work. But I agree. I find we're always getting, clients where it's like we're kind of picking up the mess. So we don't mind. It's like it makes it, you know, interesting and entertaining. Not entertaining, but do you know what I mean? Like it's like a new challenge. So it's like, all right, let's fix this. But yeah, coming to the right people, I think that's a great takeaway here. Coming to the right people the first time will help. And that's why I wanted to have you on this call, because I really like what you and Milana are doing. I love how you're built for investors. I see how you guys solve problems. And I just think for any investor who's out there purchasing, refinancing, whatever the case may be, I feel like, they should give you guys a call, right? And if they want to speak to a couple to get a couple opinions, right? They should make you guys one of them. Absolutely.
Appreciate that, Scott. We have 5 core values at our firm, and one of them is bringing new solutions to age-old problems. Um, there is no, we don't really take no. One thing I've learned, in my years of practice is that it is a lot easier to say this is too risky or oh than to figure it out. It's so much easier to say don't bother. But that doesn't move the needle for the people that need needles moved. And so that's why it's one of our core values. It's so important to actually figure out something, right? It might not be the best, but something is definitely better than nothing. Thanks for
Yeah,
that
no
shout out.
worries. So, and for those listening, because we do have an audience across Canada here, but for those listening, where do you service? Where could they use your services?
Yeah, good question. For primarily Ontario, right? All over Ontario, but primarily Ontario. If you have corporate structures that need to look outside of Ontario, there may be a scenario where we can sort of assist there. We can also help with estate planning out of province, although I generally recommend people do find a lawyer in the province in which they live, because the estate planning, the law of estate planning is governed federally, which means it works across, but the application is provincial. And so it is, it's pretty important to make sure that those proverbial T's are crossed and I's dotted within your province.
No, makes sense. So, okay, so then how does that work? Right? Because you're GTA based, say the property is in Sudbury. I'm just making this up. How do they get the keys? Like, how does that work?
Well, great question. We're a virtual firm. So our physical existence doesn't really exist anymore with real estate transactions. Largely, the keys are left at the property, usually in a lockbox of some kind. That's whether we were a traditional firm with a physical location or not, the act of couriering keys to the lawyers' offices has largely gone away, especially since COVID. Our realtor partners have really stepped in to help with that, for acting for a seller, will give us the lockbox code that we can then give to the buyer's lawyer once we have the money, and vice versa. Most law firms are pretty good about getting that information and giving it to us once they have the money if we're on for the
Awesome.
buyer.
Okay, so that's nice and easy. Um,
Yeah.
so cool. So okay, so someone's listening to this and they want to reach out to you. What's the best way that they can contact you to get this going?
Good question. You'll find me all over social media on Instagram, on Facebook. You can message me there. You can send me an email. We've got a form on our website, cardinallaw.ca, that you can fill out, and I'll get that form right to my inbox, and I'll reach out. What we do typically, especially when new investors come in, if they're looking to make a change on the legal side of their power team, we'll get on a call. You know, talk about what their goals are, where they've been, where they're going, sort of understand what gaps they're seeing that cause them to reach out, and then sort of devise a plan to get them set up and ready to take on new projects once they come on board. Right. So that means taking a look at that corporate structure, make sure it's tidy, make sure it's the right size. Right. Sometimes we have corporate structures that are too big or too small. So we want to make sure that you're making good use of your money there. And then once that's cleaned up and ready to go, tackling transactions is actually so much easier. When your books are in order, man, things are so much easier.
No, that makes sense. I agree. I agree fully.
Yeah,
So awesome, Sean. Well, listen, I really appreciate you coming on and adding value and sharing your story. So thank you. And then I'll make sure in the show notes as well that it lists your details there. So if you're listening and you're in the car and you can't take note, it'll be in the show notes. So save them for later. And thanks so much.
Scott, thanks for having me on.
Take care. Thank you so much for tuning into the show today. If you found value, please follow the show and rate it 5 stars. It would mean the world to me. And lastly, all the resources that we spoke about are at the bottom of the show notes. Looking forward to seeing you on the next episode.